Just wanted to do a video on some of the armbar vernacular we use in OyataTe International, as well as I do use the same vernacular when I'm teaching law enforcement seminars. So this part is just some basic vernacular that we use that some other people may be a little bit confused about what we're talking about. Ulnar notch is a term that I frequently talk about in regards to arm bars. Right here where the ulna bone comes up, crosses over here, you got the funny bone. This is where when you hit your elbow, everybody calls it the funny bone because you get that kind of tingling feeling in your arm. There's a little notch back here, and by notch I'm talking about there's a groove where there's no muscles, there's very little of anything here. The tendons and everything tie in, but it's this line right there above the elbow and a little on the inside, and that's where we typically put a bone when we're doing an arm bar. In this particular instance, from behind, I typically have my ulna bone in that notch, and that's where I want it to be when I'm doing an arm bar. If I pivot around and I'm doing a frontal arm bar of some sort, I may have the radial bone there. I may have like the crease here just on top of my bicep. I really don't want my bicep there because it's a big flat area and it starts to touch muscle, and I don't want that. I want to be as little of my real estate as possible in that groove. I could also be doing an arm bar with just the web. I could be doing it with the hand. Various different parts of my body can be there, but I want to be in that ulna notch. Now, if I creep up and land on the tricep, I am now putting mass on top of muscle, and that gives him something to push with. When I hit that muscle, he immediately gets the sensation that he's under attack or something's touching him, and he wants to start flexing his arm and bending his arm, and that is not conducive to me trying to straighten or hyperextend his arm. So again, I want to be down in that ulnar notch. Frequently, I will talk about the arm like it's a rope, and your wrist is the knot at the end of the rope. So I tell people to slide down to the radial ulnar notch or ulnar radial notch. And what I mean by that is I'm sliding to the end of the rope, and if I'm going to do a C-clamp kind of grip, which is very common in law enforcement because once we get to the ground, we need to retain them to put them in handcuffs. In martial arts, you may do more of the monkey grip kind of grab on that, or you may do more of the Oyata hook or various other things. There may be times when you're doing your arm bars with various parts of the body. But we want to be as low as possible. You've got the radial head, the ulnar stylus head, and then you've got the wrist, and there's a little groove right in between there. I want to go all the way down. It's like I'm traveling the rope all the way to the knot at the end when I'm doing my arm bar tactics. This also allows me, once I get somebody on the ground, or even during the process, to manipulate the wrist because my hand, the palm of my hand is there. So particularly if I get somebody all the way down to the ground with a ground pin, I can begin folding that. That is very helpful in putting handcuffs on later, but it also creates a situation where you end up with an arm bar and a wrist lock. What it can also help is it is natural human reaction if you want to bend your arm that you bend your wrist. If I slide to the end of the rope and add a little milking action, it helps keep the arm straight. It helps keep that elbow from bending. So it's just a little extra bonus that I can't get if I'm here up farther on the forearm. The farther I get on the forearm, the more I touch the muscles in the forearm. When I touch muscles in the forearm, particularly if I've got a really big hand or my opponent's got a really short arm, I start really getting up into the meat of that arm. And when I crank on muscles, that immediately sends a signal to him that something's happening, an attack, and he wants to tighten up and bend his arm. Telling him to bend his arm by grabbing a muscle, whether here or up here, is the opposite of what I want to do. I want to straighten his arm. If I'm coming up onto the meat or up here on the meat, I'm telling him that he's under attack and his muscles start to do what muscles do, and he's going to bend that arm naturally. So slide to the end of that rope, be right there at that notch, and you'll have a much better success during the course of your armbar and with follow-ups at the end of the armbar. Taika did 3-point arm bars. He was very sneaky, usually when being recorded, and not letting people see that. And it was something that was very hard to see if you were in front of him with a camcorder. If you were able to get behind him to watch, or better yet, have a camcorder behind him, you would see that he was doing a 3-point arm bar most of the time that he did arm bars, when he was really demonstrating the full power of them. A 3-point arm bar is just simply 3 points of contact. So I've slid to the end of the rope. I'm here at the wrist. That's my first point. Second point is at ulnar notch. Third point is somewhere on their side. Typically, he would belly up to the bar. So instead of having an arm bar with a vertical arm and his elbow down, he would take that elbow, and he might sneakily do it at the very last second. He'd be talking with a vertical arm, and then as he applied it, he would just put it there for a second so that not everybody would get that little tiny tidbit. But if I take that elbow and I belly up to the bar, place my elbow right there in his side, right along like the seam of his pants, the intercostal brachialis is what you're pushing against. You're pushing against the ribs and the nerves in there. That, as you see, pushes his balance off to the side. If his balance is equal or pushing into me, it makes it a lot harder for me to do the arm bar. But once I push that elbow, and if I give that elbow kind of a 3D little swirl there, it pushes his balance over to the left leg. His balance is now away from me. It makes it, even from here, without doing some of the other tips and tweaks, it makes it very easy for me to manipulate him because he's not square, he's not pushing against me. So that's our 3-point arm bar. Taika would do 3D motion with his arm bars. He didn't do linear attacks where you're going in a straight line. If you are pushing in a straight line on muscles, tendons, whatever, the person can feel that and push against it, and it's predictable motion. It's straight line. What Taika did was curves, ellipse, circles, and an ellipse is pretty much, for my opponent, impossible to predict the length of that curve, when it's going to whip around and come back, or anything like that. Straight motion, linear motion, easy to predict. Curved motion, difficult if not impossible to predict. So what Taika would do is, in his armbar motions, he would do an ellipse. As he did that armbar motion, it would be an ellipse. Instead of just a straight line coming back, it would be an ellipse motion. As part of that ellipse, what it also does is it isolates the shoulder. When his arm goes in front of him and goes up, and he might actually even lift a little as he does that motion, it pushes that shoulder up and isolates it, which makes it more difficult to resist. Even without doing some of the other tricks like 3-point armbar, if I'm here and his shoulder's isolated, it makes it a lot harder for him to resist. And I didn't even finish the ellipse because I put him in that position and gave him time to reset and pause. What a typical 3-point armbar with isolation looks like is Taika would slide to the end of the knot, maybe here, maybe here. He would go for the ulnar notch here, might start vertical, but he would go into the side. Now I've got 3 points of contact. My opponent is off balance. I do this rowing motion. There's his shoulder getting isolated. Once I'm there, I'm now going to do a class 1 lever and pull the hand, and the opponent goes away. Arm bars are typically done in both martial arts and law enforcement industry as either a class 1 or a class 3 lever. If you think back to probably junior high, you had a physics class where you had class 1, class 2, and class 3 levers. Arm bars are either class 1 or class 3. Class 1 is your most efficient physical motion. It's what people use to move large objects. It's like using a crowbar. If I've got something that needs to be moved that's bigger than me, I want the most efficient lever possible to move that. Class 1. Class 3 is very common, and I see it more in law enforcement training than I do in martial arts, but it is prevalent in both. A class 3 lever being most inefficient, if I go in and get into a standard arm bar prep position, I'm getting ready to do a position, a class 3 lever makes the fulcrum, the pivot point, down here at the wrist. If that pivot point is here, to move his shoulder, I've got to move this long bar forward, and I'm pushing in the center. A very common thing in law enforcement used to be you held this, you tied it to your side. I don't see that very much in martial arts. I do see it, but I see it more prevalent in law enforcement. And then they would push down in the center. It doesn't work very well. Class 3 lever is the least efficient. It's the most inefficient lever you can possibly put on somebody or something else. Class 1 lever is efficient because here's his arm. If you think about it like a straight crowbar, I'm trying to move this thing forward. If it's like a teeter-totter or seesaw on the playground, for this to move forward, this has to move in the opposite direction. And it's very efficient in that manner. I've got the half distances, roughly. Instead of trying to move the entire bar, I'm moving half the bar. It's an efficient motion. So even without doing all my off-balancing and everything, if I'm here in the proper area and I pull the bottom of the lever, his wrist, up into my armpit, it makes his shoulder go forward. So every time we do an arm bar, whichever position it is in, I want to think about how can I make this a class 1 lever. And follow. If he goes to the ground and I choose to follow him and take him to a pin, this arm, the fulcrum, the teeter-totter center, can follow. Everything's isolated. I got 3 points of contact. I just pull, and if I choose to go to the ground with that, I'm going to buckle my knees and this arm's going to follow. It's got a foundation, a frame. It's not going to push forward and lengthen as I go down. I'm going to follow. It's very important because if I push, then I'm doing a class 3 lever, which is not efficient. Another term I frequently use is what I call wedging. If I am in that ulnar notch, I've got that bone in right there in that notch. Once I do all my other little tricks and he starts to bend over, if I want to take him away from me, right now, this particular arm bar, my ulna bone is in that notch. If I want to take him away from me, I push that ulnar notch. As I'm pulling up, I just relocate the angle of attack towards the direction I want to go. So if I'm going here, I'm probably taking him straight down, but if I rotate that just a little bit, he's going to go away from me. So that's typically how I might do that motion if I want him just to go away and I want to take off or something else. If I do all those same things and I start to get him bent over, but I want to take him straight down, maybe there's a bar or a coffee table there, I'm going to point that ulna bone towards the space where I want him to go. I'm going to rotate it, and then he's going to go in that direction. That's what I call wedging. Now, wedge is an audio-visual tool. I've got a giant rubber wedge here, and if he just kind of bends over for display purposes, if I display this for my students, particularly the police officers at the academy, I use this wedge. So straight here, it's your standard teeter-totter. If I want him to go away, I point it that direction, and he goes that direction. If I want him to go in front of me, I point it that direction, and he goes that direction. That's why I call it wedging. Want him to go there, I point the wedge that direction. I want him to go here, I point the wedge that direction. Or specifically, various angles. And that wedge, in this particular instance, is my ulnar bone. Another analogy I commonly use is the coffee cup analogy. So if I've got him over in the initial position of an armbar, I'm in that ulna groove right there, the ulnar notch. If I want him to go away from me, I turn the coffee cup towards me. I spill the coffee on me, or I take a drink from the coffee cup. If I want him to go right here in front of me, right here in front of my right foot, then I spill the coffee on him. So that's just another analogy I use. If you sometimes hear me talking about spill the coffee on you, spill the coffee on him, that is what I'm talking about.